Okay, we're back on with Michael Middleton today. This is Gavin Mehl. We're going to talk everything about Bitcoin and going over this upcoming court case and some of the fundamentals about the technology that are missing out that we haven't really covered before. So, Michael, how you doing, buddy? Good to see you.
It's good to see you too, Gavin. What is the date again today? Just for
Today would be the 12th of January.
Okay, very good. Very good. Nice to
Yep.
see you.
Nice to see you. So let me just update your name, Michael Middleton. And you're down in Florida right now, aren't you?
Yes, sir. I'm in Miami Beach. It's funny. I just got here the other day, and right after I came in, they had a tornado right after I touched down. Apparently.
Nice. Well, people really liked our discussion last time that we had, and thought it was really an interesting. You have a really interesting background and some very fascinating subjects that you brought up. So thought it would be good for us to reconnect. And
Well, I appreciate that. I've watched. Obviously, I'm in the background a lot. I watch a lot of things, and I've watched some of your other guests who are very interesting. And I just wanted to bring a little more of my take on some of those things, just to round out the picture a little bit.
yeah, well, let's why don't we could start there. You reached out to me about this Kleiman, v. Wright case.
Yes.
That can be a little bit complicated. So why don't we just save time on I'll hold back on that and go
Okay.
ahead and start with whatever you had in mind that you wanted to share.
Okay. Well, I guess there's a couple things that I wanted to talk about, and one of them, in one of your recent interviews, there was a lot of discussion regarding the block size rewards, and there wasn't much talk about the transaction fees. And what I wanted to talk about was the reason, in my opinion, the way Satoshi set up Bitcoin, and I've watched him hundreds of hours of Craig Wright stuff, and the entire purpose of the way he structured it was the subsidies, which are the block rewards, were designed to start nascent industries, very similar to the way South Korea got Samsung and others going. They subsidize them. And then afterwards, when they start to make revenue, then South Korea enjoys the benefits, as well as does all the people of not only their nation, but the world. And, obviously you see now where Samsung and a few others are because of the subsidy. That is what the block size reward is designed to do. And that's why it halves every 4 years. And then the goal over time is, as the subsidies fade away to nothing, all of the miners make their money now off of transactions and the fees from the transactions. And that's why we need to have scale. Because when you have scale, and even though it's a fraction of a cent, or even a Satoshi in the future, there'll be so many transactions that the miners will be making all their money from the transactions as opposed to the subsidies. Now, the reason this resonated with me in my world is my whole background was in property taxes, in real estate. And I got involved with a lot of low-income housing that were built due to subsidies created by the government for Section 8 low-income housing. And these subsidies were specifically designed to give the developers a low, below-market interest rate to get the apartments built. And so I'm very familiar with subsidies and their purpose. And so it kind of resonated for me when I found Bitcoin, when he started talking about the subsidies. That's what the block sizes are, which is why they half all the time. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about, is how the miner revenue actually comes from long-term, the transaction fees, and not so much the block size rewards. Although in the beginning, it was mostly the block size rewards, and that's why we see most of the miners chasing the block size rewards. But once hyper Bitcoinization occurs, then I think in the future, we're going to see a lot less reliance until it becomes nothing as far as the block size reward. And those miners will be making the majority of their money from transaction fees. So that's the first topic I wanted to talk about. If you have anything to reply to that.
Well, to summarize it, it looks like you're bringing up the concept of, where the miners currently get the money from the block size rewards, and then in the future, they're going to get money from the transaction fees. And is that specific to a specific chain on Bitcoin?
Actually, no, it's all of them. And they all do get the transaction fees. They're just so small in the beginning because there's not many transactions. And that's then one of the next topics we'll talk about is the actual chain and we call it the forks or the protocols that happen to Bitcoin. But all blockchains, I think, are similar. They all start with a subsidy because they're basically following in the footsteps of Bitcoin. And so they all start with, they have these transaction fees, and then they also have the block size rewards. Now, then some of them go to proof of stake rather than proof of work, and they do all sorts of things that are not really in accordance with the original idea put forth in Bitcoin. But at their core, in my opinion, they're all pretty much following the idea that was laid out in Bitcoin.
Sounds you mentioned proof of work and proof of stake. Did you want to what exactly, how do you understand the difference between the two?
Yeah, and so, well, proof of work is and some of the things I saw early on, there's a gentleman by the name of Adrian Antonopoulos, and he actually had a lot of good ideas, although I know that he's not well thought of by Craig Wright because he went down a different path, but he did have a lot of good ideas. And what he's talking about with proof of work, the way he explained it, was, for example, the pyramids, right? The ancient pyramids. That's a proof of work that's still around. And it took whatever energy it was that created those pyramids. Those things are lasting for a long, long time. That's proof of work right there. So Bitcoin itself is going to last a long, long time. And it's done through proof of work because you have to have electricity for the miners to do the mining. Like, you can't just, there's no other way to do it. So there's work involved. Stake is different. Stake is where if I have a lot of money and I have more than you, I can throw all my money, even though might have took work to get that money. I might have also stole that money. You don't know how I got it. How did I get that advantage over you? So, and I think Ethereum has gone to that, where it's, there's a staking system, and I think that gives an advantage to those who have the stake. And what I'll say, the reason I don't like that is, for example, BlackRock. If BlackRock now has a bunch of BTC, and now let's say they're investing in a bunch of BSV, right? Then if Bitcoin was not proof of work, then that would give them an advantage over the rest of everyone because of the amount of BSV or actual Bitcoin they would hold. But since it is proof of work and the miners are doing the work to verify the transactions, even though they have a large potential holding of BSV, it doesn't really, there's still a level playing field for the rest of us that have BSV and that are willing to do the work to create something on the platform known as Bitcoin.
Seems like it sounds like it levels the playing field a little bit more with the proof of work side, where anybody can mine blocks if they can afford the equipment. And, not only that, it seems like it also, I think the white paper discussed the Byzantine generals problem, where they're trying to solve a problem and, signal to the others that, the way they're trying to signal to the other, basically, I think the story goes that, like, if we're fighting on two sides of a wall, and you want to signal to me when you get over to the other side that it's safe to come in, well, you're going to, in order for me to prove that it's a successful signal and you're not maybe like convinced by the other side, or it could be a psyop, well, you actually had to sacrifice your men and build them up, high enough to where I could see you over the wall, and I'm waving to you like, okay, wow, he actually killed men off, sacrificed his own men, so I can see that he made it on the other side of the wall. And in this case, the miners were sacrificing energy, time and energy and money to mine these blocks and become honest miners, honest nodes. So
that's a very excellent point, because that is the one of the things, and I saw numerous videos about the problem you just discovered, or that you just relayed, and a lot of it could be like, let's say not just two, but you've got four forces. Like, you're going to go around a castle and you've got four forces coming from all different sides, and you don't have electronics back in the day. You got to rely on either a sound or a predetermined time, and again, you don't have watches, you have none of that. So they had a very difficult time, because if you go quickly and then, the right flank doesn't come in on time, it's over. So that was the problem. And of course that was, that and many other problems were solved, of course, by Bitcoin.
So, you had a chart that you wanted to share. Did you want to go into discussing that? It looks like it was about, like,
Yes.
I don't know if it was decentralized versus distributed ledgers or what it was about, but
Well,
definitely.
let's see if I can, let me see if I can find that real quick. Okay.
Go ahead. Okay, looks like
Okay.
we're looking at, it says Bitcoin SV forks from the original protocol.
Okay. So what I'm going to show you here, and this is not mine. I got this off the internet a while ago. I have a lot of charts that show things. And what this shows is the original Bitcoin itself. And then whether you want to call it a split or a fork or something that actually deviates from the original protocol. Okay. So at
You
the
got the
very
white
top,
paper, then the
from
Genesis
the white,
block.
right. The white paper is the start of the protocol. And of course, the original block was not created by, let's say, mining. You had to have something to anchor it. So it's my opinion, and in doing a lot of research and reading, that I think Craig Wright, or whoever created Bitcoin, created that as an anchor. Let's call it an origin. The
Genesis
origin of,
block, you mean?
yes, the Genesis block.
And
Okay.
that's interesting because that's recently now that's right here relevant to this court case that's coming up, because they got the Genesis block received that 27 Bitcoin just recently. And then
Yes.
Wright was tweeting, and others, Zim Gao, we were talking, and Jack Pitts have been tweeting about how it's an anchor and it cannot move because of it. And it really is an interesting protocol. It really a very it's fascinating. So go ahead and continue. Sorry to.
That's okay, no problem. So what you see here is, in the very first one, is the white paper where the block is, and then the Genesis block. So after the white paper comes the first block that was created, right? And then we start the chain. And of course, every 10 minutes, we call it the heartbeat of Bitcoin, when all the transactions get verified by the miners, and they of course solve the difficult math problem, and then the reward comes out. So then after we move forward, then the original fork, and if you look on the right hand side, was the SegWit fork. And of course, the SegWit fork, back when I was still, in my nascent understanding, because I didn't understand all this either, I was following individuals, and I actually thought that the SegWit might have been a good idea, because, I, like everyone else, was following certain things. It wasn't until,
What
yeah, it
does
wasn't until
SegWit
late.
stand for?
Segregated witness. So what happens is, Craig Wright explains that what Bitcoin is, it's a series of signatures from me to you, like in law. So if I sell you the title to my car, and then you sell it to your brother, and then your brother sells it to someone down the street, there's a series of signatures that goes with that car. And if you separate those,
so I could see how many owners, like I want to know how many owners own that car, 2 owners, 3 owners, 4 owners, because it could
well,
change the value I want to pay.
not only for you to see it, but to prove title, to prove ownership from the beginning of the car. So if you can't prove title, how can you, and someone else, recently I had a car that someone else got a hold of. They had the title, because I needed to transfer title, and I had the car. Well, they got the title, and they weren't giving it back to me. So, if someone's walking around with your title and you don't have it and you can't prove it, then the police can come and just take your car. I mean, you have to be able to prove title. So anyway, what they did with SegWit was, and they did it all in the name of, we need to save space because we can only have 1 megabyte blocks, which instinctively I knew was wrong, because I sold computers, and to tell me that you needed to put everything into a 1 megabyte, when I'm dealing with gigabytes now in my world, made no sense to me. And then later on, I found out from Craig Wright I was right. So in addition to the SegWit fork, I guess there was a SegWit 2x, and then there was this second layer BTC Lightning Network, which I never thought was going to work. I never tried it. And of course, by the time I finally figured out that BTC was way off base, the Lightning Network I was not in that.
How many removed is this Lightning? It's called the Lightning Network. How many removed is that?
When you say how many removed, I don't understand the question.
From the From layer 0 or layer 1 Bitcoin.
Well, layer 1 is Bitcoin. Anytime you go on a different direction and you do something different, and that's when Bitcoin forked into Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, right? And
Yeah.
then that's when things changed. And that's where you see the green block right there, right?
Yeah.
And of course, that was the legacy chain. At that point in time, my understanding was Craig Wright was working with Roger Ver, and they were both on the size of large blocks, right? And so I was on that side too. And so I actually converted a bunch of my BTC at that point in time into BCH, um, only to find out. And of course, I hadn't even heard of Craig Wright at that time, to be honest. I had been following Roger Ver and a bunch of others with Bitcoin. And I just instinctively felt that, you have to have larger blocks. And it made sense. You got to have as Roger Ver used to say, you need to have the transactions fast, inexpensive or cheap, and reliable. And
Roger
if they're
Ver
not
was
reliable,
like, he was on the scene at that point, man. I remember he was making videos all, it seemed like every day, and he just had so much good things to say. And Ryan X Charles was pumping him out. I remember that, and I think I'm right. I don't think I heard Craig Wright either at that time. I really don't think I ever heard of him. It all just made sense what Roger was saying at that time in 2017.
yes. So, and Roger did make a lot of sense. And I think I mentioned in my last video, I met Roger Ver in person down in Acapulco. He gave a tremendous speech, and he was passing out Bitcoin fast and furious to anyone who wanted it. And he called him, I guess he was called Bitcoin Jesus at the time. And of course, I spoke to him, and then it wasn't until later on that I found out that when there was a split coming between Roger Ver and Craig Wright over the block, not only the block size, but then opcodes, and then this other, I don't know, was it wormhole, whatever they wanted to introduce to be anarchists, which made no sense once I understood that anarchy was the second tenet of communism.
Hold that thought. Go ahead. So we were talking about how now, so you got Bitcoin Cash, and then then you go to the next block where it says BCH checkpoint blocks.
Okay, so after we broke off into, and the way this tree is it shows that BTC went off of the legacy, but BCH still stayed in line with the original protocol. You see that?
Yeah.
So because we start from the Genesis block and we come straight down. So this is the best thing that I found that shows how BSV, comes through on the other side. So now that we know that BTC is off on the right doing their own thing, and of course the advantage that they had is they had all of the
well, they have the name in the original ticker.
Yeah, but more than that, and there was no original ticker. They created the original ticker. When Bitcoin was released, there was no ticker. The ticker was created by exchanges. That's the word I was looking for. They had all the exchanges, and the exchanges were controlling Bitcoin. And then, of course, we started with, Tether and all those things, which are designed to let the powers that be manipulate Bitcoin, which is what they've done through BTC. And of course, all I'm doing is borrowing a bunch of Craig Wright's. He said this, if you go and watch his stuff, he says this over and over again. So if we come back to this chain, so now we have Bitcoin Cash, and now we know that BTC in my world was, even though I had some left, I didn't think much of it. Okay. So now we come down, and now there's a quote unquote war between, on the BCH side, between Bitcoin Cash and BSV. And of course, Craig Wright is espousing unlimited block sizes. And all of a sudden, Roger Ver is talking about 8 megabytes or 32 megabytes and then adding some different, wormhole or all this other stuff. And I'm thinking, okay, so here's a gentleman who's not the creator. And of course, he was one of the first adopters of it. But I don't have any better way to say this. It smacked of arrogance to take someone else's creation and go your own way with it. So I started converting the Bitcoin Cash into BSV, or a lot of my Bitcoin Cash into BSV. Of course, I always kept some. But then later on, and when I got to start to really watch Craig Wright, and I really started to read the lawsuits, the Tulip lawsuit. And I mean, I delved deep into the lawsuits, which are all public, on the public domain. So I print them out and I would read them. And I saw Craig Wright give his speeches down in Colombia about his vision for Bitcoin. And thank you.
Yeah.
So that made a lot of sense to me.
So that sounds like a good segue over here to what's going on with some of these court cases, and around that time, Asha was in actually right around that time, I think it was 2018. He got sued. Craig Wright got sued by Ira Kleiman, and Ira Kleiman was actually, Craig says he was his best friend. They were best friends.
No, I need to stop you there. That's unfortunately not right.
No,
Ira Kleiman was, I believe, the brother of David Kleiman.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Ira Kleiman was the brother. Yeah.
Yeah, so remember, and Craig Wright did a lot of videos. He did a very emotional video when David died, because it was like one of his best friends. And so I watched that whole thing.
David was one of his best friends. Yes.
Yes.
And they met in person and everything in Florida. Yeah.
Yeah. And David helped him, although he wasn't in any way like a creator, he just bounced ideas off of David. But David was also, I think, instrumental in being his right-hand man, setting up the Tulip Trust and all of the keys. And it's my understanding that David was very instrumental of all that. But according to Craig, like, he worked so hard, he basically worked himself into an early grave. And so Ira then, and if you read some of the court case, the one that we're talking about, there was the mother of Ira and David. And of course, Craig wrote to her on several occasions and was trying to do the right thing and give her what was, due, because he felt that certainly David had done a lot, although he didn't feel that Ira had done anything, at least in my opinion. And of course, it looks to me like Ira took control of that, and they went forward with the lawsuit. And even though they, quote unquote, won, they didn't win. All they got was
wait. Let's see what the court has to say here. So
they only got a small judgment. They didn't win anything. They lost on all major points.
Let's go. Yeah, the court went to a jury trial. Now, yes. Kleiman's estate appealed, and then the United States Court of Appeals 11th Circuit, which is one of the circuit courts overseeing the district court there in Florida. So this is one of the main circuit courts right underneath the Supreme Court for the United States. This is a big court. This is one of the big giant courts. So it appealed. Yes, the appeal involved the ownership claim between about the origins of what they call the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. And we've already went through and ultimately what they were trying to determine was this guy Kleiman, who and Wright were friends, formed a partnership to develop the original Bitcoin protocol. And so Kleiman's estate is suing Wright for money, ultimately in Bitcoin, because they're saying they were partners. That was his claim. Now, correct. Aside from all the stuff that happened, let's just, the court found they were not partners. And here's what the court says. It goes through that the law of partnership, and it determines the elements of partnership, and that it determines that, the estate's views that, they argued that these cases above were not controlling. And they said, well, these other laws that were passed, they don't have any relevance in this case. That was what they tried to argue. Ultimately, the plaintiff in this case, which was Kleiman, he had the burden of proof showing there was a partnership, and there was a great amount of evidence he had to show. And for these reasons, he did not. So the court could not find any form of partnership. Accordingly, we reject the estate's claim that the district court erred in instructing the jury on the formation of partnership, meaning that the jury trial found there was no partnership, and basically the appeals court sustained that and said, correct, there was no partnership. All right, so that is a very significant ruling. Then we go into sanctions, but did you have any comments regarding that partnership?
Yeah, so I think what happened is there was a trust created, and there was some monies that were awarded, I think interest that had to be paid or something from Craig Wright to the trust, which he was one of the owners of the trust. So they used that award initially to report to the media that Kleiman had won, to make Craig Wright look bad, in my opinion.
No, well,
And that's why there was.
let me
Go ahead.
just chime in on that. What happened was that's a good point that you bring up. Now, you see this sanctions right here?
Yeah.
Kleiman won sanctions. All right. Now, what happened is that during, I could read through this, but let me summarize what happened. Basically, Kleiman, a magistrate judge, which is below the district judge, it's kind of like it's like you have a magistrate, then you have a district court judge, then you have an appeals court judge. So the
Yes, I
magistrate
understand.
judge, he made a ruling about sanctioning Wright for failing to bring forward what was called the what's actually called. Let me pull it up here. Actually, it's called the compliance with the court order. And if you go back to the 2020, I actually have the document here. Yeah, so Wright was sanctioned. Here we go. Share. This right here was the original compliance order. Can you see where it says Craig Wright's notice of compliance with the court's order?
I can't, but go ahead.
Okay.
I'm on a phone, so it's too small.
No. Okay. So basically what happened is that the court had sanctioned him for not complying and producing what was called the, this is a legal term here, what was that? What was that legal term
Prima facie?
No, let me just pause. I'm recording. All right. So during the litigation, the estate sought discovery from Wright about his Bitcoin holdings, which was believed to be relevant to establish the universe of Bitcoin mined during that partnership period. So Wright resisted, and he asserted that the information was impossible to produce. And then in 2011 and 2012, Wright transferred ownership of all the Bitcoin that he had mined or acquired or would acquire to the Tulip Trust, of which he was both a trustee and a beneficiary. So Wright controlled 7, this is according to the court, of the 8 key slices required to access the Bitcoin address information and was without access to his own. Nonetheless, Wright indicated that based on an arrangement with David before he died, David Kleiman, he expected to receive another key slice by a bonded courier in 2020.
Correct.
So the magistrate judge at this point ordered sanctions against Wright. And he completely rejected Wright's story. He found it unbelievable, and he found his ability to comply was unacceptable. And the magistrate judge at this point says that what Wright did was false and fraudulent. This is what happened right here. Now hold right there. This right here is exactly what you mentioned earlier about went nuts in the media. Wright's a fraud. Well, because the magistrate's saying this right here, that Wright testified falsely, this created a buzz in the media. Now, really, really, really important, because what happens next here is that the court shows here, the district court denied relief, and the court concluded that Wright had willfully obstructed the discovery process and denied the state evidence, and the court found the sanctions were warranted. But then just 4 days later, Wright filed a notice that the third party had provided necessary information and key slice to unlock the encrypted file, and that he had produced a list of his Bitcoin holdings as required by the magistrate judge. Okay, then they appealed to the district court judge on these sanctions. This is going to go on for a bunch of pages about this. But what happens next is the court found that the district court, they reversed anything to do with about the magistrate's judge finding about fraud or wrongdoing by Wright. That was completely overturned. It was reversed. So, and what the reason was, they said that the magistrate judge was out of line. He didn't have any facts to support any of that. He just did that, and he didn't go to trial about that. So they then went to trial, and then Wright won at trial. He won hands down at trial. He was required to then pay money to a company that he and his wife had controlled. That was
like some interest or something. There was some, and that's why they took
Kleiman
off.
Got nothing.
Nothing.
The partnership there was no partnership. I mean, ultimately, and nobody else helped Wright, start and create Bitcoin. At least nobody came forward. There was nobody. The court said,
no one that we know of, because Craig Wright is always, he's always said that he was the primary creator, but he's very careful with his words, that he had others that helped him. And he never really said who they were. He never really named them, but the fact that he authored it and his name was all over it, and that he can answer all the questions about it, and that he keeps winning trial after trial,
Well,
when the real
yeah,
truth comes out,
it'll
it's very
be
obvious.
interesting, because if there was somebody, well, you know, and you're trying to prove that he isn't Satoshi Nakamoto, well, it sure would be an easy way to do that by bringing forward Satoshi Nakamoto at trial. If you're the other side,
Can we go back to the
the
timeline
owner.
thing? And then I'm
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Let's go back to that, and I want to. You're going to bring up something about the Genesis block, right?
Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to this time frame now, because we're back in the beginning of 2020, when I believe Craig finally got this key, right? I think that's when this was.
Yeah, he
so
got
when
it
he
in
was finally
2020.
able to prove it to the court. But
Yep.
something else very important happened then, because Craig Wright is he's battling on multiple fronts. He's battling in the court, but he's also battling to save Bitcoin. And so on February 4th of 2020 is when the Genesis upgrade, which restored the original Bitcoin protocol because even though the protocol goes straight through, the core developers had done with BTC before the split ever happened, they had already done some damage to Bitcoin.
And I'm just sharing on the screen right now the compliance with the court order. It shows here where Wright supplied the bonded courier to the court, and the key slices.
Nice. Oh, so and what is there a date on that? What is the date on that?
January 10th, 2020.
Okay, so that's what I thought. I remember that time frame, and I remember following that, very closely back at the time frame.
So now you're going to February 4th, shortly thereafter. What happened?
Now I'm going to February 4th. And so what happened on February 4th, see, when Bitcoin, when Blockstream took over, let's call the development, and decided to keep the block sizes small and not let them grow and let miners be the ones to determine how big the blocks should be, they basically handicapped the way Bitcoin should have gone. So even though the protocol wasn't necessarily changed, it wasn't allowed to grow the way it should have. And so when the split happened in between to BTC and BCH, right, I think Craig was trying to get the protocol back to where his original vision was. And because Roger didn't want to let the block size be determined by the miners, and he wanted to do some other things, he went in a different direction. So what Craig Wright then did with CoinGeek and Calvin Ayre is they decided to restore the opcodes, which allows you to attach files to the Bitcoin's blocks, and I think what's the other thing? Script. Like there's all kinds of these special codes which SegWit took out and they weren't using. They were never really used. So that's why on February 4th of 2020, when the Genesis block was restored to the original design by the creator, Craig Wright, for me, that was a very instrumental day. And in my life, as you know, from our last meeting, that was also the date of my Genesis when, I had my own personal tragedy to deal with on February 4th. I was, how do I say this?
Why should people care about the Genesis upgrade?
Because the Genesis upgrade restores the protocol. Let's talk about protocol for a minute. Microsoft has, what's the name of their, after DOS, there was a protocol that everyone used on their computers, Unix. That Unix protocol was used the world over to run the operating system of most computers. Until the internet came out, and there was a gentleman, I don't know if he was from the Netherlands or whatever, but he took one piece of the Unix code, changed it, and called it Linux. And then he put it out into the wild. Well, Linux today is like the #1 operating system that is stable, that runs most of the phones. So if you have a stable protocol that no one can change, then you can build on it, then no one can. And that's why Craig Wright is saying his protocol is set in stone. Well, when he left the project for whatever his personal reasons were, and he turned it over to, let's say, Gavin and whoever else, then when he came back, right, after he resolved his whatever personal issues Craig Wright had, Now he wants to restore the original protocol. So what's the importance of February 4th, 2020? Well, the Genesis upgrade restores not only the original protocol, but the original design of what the protocol was to do. So if you really believe that Bitcoin is going to change the world because everything is going to ride on top of the Bitcoin blockchain, and it's going to be, a base layer even for the internet, which, Craig Wright has talked about. Now you see, well, okay, well then February 4th of 2020 is a landmark day for Bitcoin as well as the world, because now the truth machine that was created with Bitcoin, and there's all kinds of
kind of like
papers
the second birth. So it sounds like a Bitcoin. It's almost like
it's the second, yes, it's the rebirth, absolutely. And that's if you see some of my social media, I talk about February 4th being like a second chance for.
So it's like it's like a rebirth or a second coming of Bitcoin. It sounds like. So what?
Yes.
It gets a little bit more complicated there. But one of the things I wanted to ask you is like what, so. Why should people really care? You're talking about, okay, Bitcoin being a future of the internet. So people know about Bitcoin. It's supposed to be digital gold. That's kind of like what people hear about
Well,
it now.
let me stop you right there. That
Yeah.
Bitcoin is not supposed to be digital gold. It was never supposed to be digital gold. It's not mentioned at all in the white paper. That's a farce. That's what BTC has changed it to. Okay. Bitcoin was supposed to be, its first application was money. Right. And if you don't understand money can be like, if back in the day, if you lived in the mountains, seashells was money because seashells was scarce. And if you lived by the seashore, you used stones from the mountains because they were scarce. So, and all that is, money is just information. It's just a way to communicate. Before that, we were doing barter. So why does anyone care? Because all we want to do is transfer our wealth to each other with some sort of communication. And now we're using Federal Reserve notes. Before we were using
a stable protocol.
A stable protocol. Before it was silver and gold, and what's happening is, we did barter for I don't know how many years. Then when they started finding gold, that lasted for a lot of years, but a lot shorter. Then it came to paper currencies, fiat money, and that lasted for even a shorter period. But now we're into electronics. So everything is going faster and faster and faster with a lot less time. Okay. And so now we are into the point of, and that's why and Danny Krawitz is right. When you talk about hyper Bitcoinization, I do believe at one point it will be a very fast transition when people finally realize that the real Bitcoin, the way to transfer money, is through BSV. And that's just the first application of it, is money. Later on, now let's start talking crazy, like Star Trek, and they're talking to the computers, and money isn't even relevant in that world anymore when you have replicators and all kinds of things. And we're still a long way from that, but we're already start talking about, what do we have, 3D printers now that can print all kinds of stuff. I mean, we are starting to get to a different world.
Did you ever hear of George Gilder? He wrote a book called Life After Google.
I did not.
Okay. Well, it'll be an interesting. I'm going to talk with Brett Banify as well, and we're gonna talk about that. He knows George, I guess, and he wrote an amazing book. It basically talked about the concept of how he gave an example of there was a little town they're basically called Crestwood. It was a fictional town, and the idea is that everybody in Crestwood operated with Google, where they, AdWords, and when the little business would be on Google, and you search it and you go to your little handy store. All of a sudden, Google went down, and the people that were running off of Google Ads and Google Words, their businesses started suffering, and people started going back into a peer-to-peer operation, dealing with each other directly without having to go into a third party. And so he brings in this concept of peer-to-peer operation in what he would call like distributed consensus idea of a blockchain, and where life will be on the other side of Google. And this guy is an esteemed author, one of the most, he's a very credible, big thinker. George Gilder. I would love to talk with him sometime. So yeah, I highly recommend the book. Life After.
That's very interesting. And it's funny, thoughts are living beings in my world. And so a lot of times when these thoughts come in like peer to peer, like, here's Bitcoin, and then this other gentleman takes it and it's peer to peer, me to you, right? And what did Craig Wright say? Alice to Bob, right? That's how he explained it. Bitcoin is, he says it's a cash system, but he's talking more importantly, and that's why it's so important to understand that IPv4 and IPv6, because IPv4 is just a protocol that's been around for a long time that most computers run on. But IPv6 has been around for the last 20 or 30 years. It's much faster and it gives a whole lot more domains. And that's who Craig Wright and CoinGeek is working with.
Why should people care about IPv6?
Well, why would you care about having a bicycle instead of a unicycle, or having a four-wheel car instead of a unicycle? Because you can do so much more. IPv6 is the latest, greatest thing that will allow micropayments and microtransactions. And also all the smart devices now will be using IPv6 because there's just not enough addresses. Just like everyone had area codes, San Diego used to have one, now they got 4. Right. So you have to be able to expand. Well, IPv4, that technology only allowed so many and it got full. So IPv6 allowed a whole lot more, but it also upgraded and allowed for micropayments, which is in the original protocol. And by the way, the last time we talked about the original protocol, I think I said HTTP/IP. I think I was wrong. I think it's TCP/IP is the original protocol, and I just, sometimes my brain doesn't think right.
So here's the definition of money. There's a number of definitions, but one of the definitions out of Ballantines Law Dictionary: a generic term covering everything which by common concept represents property and passes currently from hand to hand without necessity for inquiring as to title. So like a transfer between parties is a generic term of common concept representing passing between hand to hand, without necessarily inquiring as to title. Money, that's just a transfer.
Yeah, and real money actually has, and I can't. I used to give classes to my children as well as my employees about what real money is. It has to be divisible, it has to be fungible, it has to have value. There's a certain set of characteristics that real money has to have, which is why silver and gold was chosen by our founding fathers, because it was divisible, it was fungible, and Bitcoin is the latest and greatest real money, even though it's going to take us so much further because it's programmable. It's programmable money. I mean, think about that.
Well, it is interesting to think that there's what's called 100 million Satoshis in one Bitcoin. Actually, isn't that, it's 100 million of those little things, and are not divisible. So I wanted to talk to Brett about this as well, really breaking down like the magnitude of that. That's why the power of just getting one. People should just get one BSV. Yeah,
one's good. Of course, more than one's better. But the other thing I want to talk about is, there are 3 main Bitcoin. There's Bitcoin itself, BTC. Then there's BCH, which is Bitcoin Cash, and there's BSV, which is Bitcoin Satoshi Vision. But actually, BTC had a number of forks themselves afterwards. One's called Bitcoin Gold, one called Bitcoin Diamond. So there's a number of other quote unquote forks that I followed. And if you had the original Bitcoin, you got all those forks, because it's like owning a stock before it splits. So because most of my Bitcoin were acquired in 2014 and 15 initially, I was able to sit back and watch and see what happened and just learn as I went. And that's what we all do. We learn as we go. If you don't know something, like I had no idea until I heard Craig Wright say that, because I was an anarchist. I participated in that whole Anarchapulco thing with Jeff Berwick, and I still think they've got a lot of good ideas. But espousing anarchy just doesn't make any sense when you listen to like Craig Wright says. BSV is the only one that's out there that's compliant with every government. Hello, you want to impel government to be honest. Exactly. You don't want to fight government. You want to impel them, like our founding fathers said. If you don't like the laws, then you work to change them. That's the way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Seems like setting things up within the regulatory framework is the key. Yes. Not we'll deal with that later. No, you do it way in advance.
And
Seems like
in a way, you look at the founding fathers, and if you do the research on them, many of our founding fathers did not meet good ends, right? Because they were, I saw documentaries on all the things that they suffered and went through because of their pursuit of liberty. But that doesn't really bother me. As far as I'm concerned, if you're not free and you're not doing what you know to be right,
why
you,
why do you think that Bitcoin SV is so hated and so talked bad about by so it seems like it's the most hated thing, hated digital.
well, the people that control the planet, I'm going to be straight with you, they're satanic. And so they don't want anything that is going to help other people and really do change the world for good, because their control of the population is through lies and manipulation. And Bitcoin is a truth machine that will reveal them. And it's happening right now.
Seems like Bitcoin takes away power.
It gives power to the individual and takes
Yeah.
it away from those who want to control others.
It takes away, yeah, it gives power to the individual. That's a good point. And
Yes.
it takes power away from the controlling, the invisible controlling parties.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly where we're at. And
So
the other shout out I want to give to, there's a gentleman by the name of Mike Maloney. And
Michael
Mike
Maloney?
Yeah, Mike Maloney has a series called The Hidden Secrets of Money. It was a 12-part thing, and it used to be on YouTube. And he's a gold and silver dealer. And I saw him give speeches down in Acapulco. Very interesting. A lot of the things I've learned about money have been from Mike Maloney. And I recommend to anyone who watches his 12-part series, The Hidden Secrets of Money, because he does it with cartoons and irrefutable common sense knowledge. The Hidden Secrets of Money.
Hidden Secrets of Money by Mike Maloney. It looks like Mike had put out just recently, he talked about how they were experiencing hyperinflation in, I think it was Argentina.
Yep.
And he was talking about, it was rather interesting. I think it was an article he just wrote today or yesterday, and it was talking about how, he was doing an analysis on the price of eggs. He's like, what would it be like? Over there, they're paying, I think it was like $176 for a price for eggs or something. How are they? I mean, this is like really going, it's like happening right now. This is current.
I think it's let me share a brief story. So I went with my wife and my son to Ohio State College way back before my son started college 4 or 5 years ago. And we got in an Uber with a gentleman from Venezuela, and they had just experienced hyperinflation. So I started talking to him, and I asked him about hyperinflation. He had been in the United States for about 7 years. He goes, well, let me tell you, I bought a car for 300,000. I think he said Bolivar. I can't remember what their currency was. And he says, so 2 years later, I sold the car. And he says, you don't want to know what I got? I said, what did you get? He goes, I got 425,000 Bolivar. I said, oh, and he goes, now you would think I made money, but no, because they were inflating the currency away. He says, you know what I could get today about 5 years later? And I said, what? And he said, a piece of candy.
Piece of what?
Candy.
Oh,
a piece of candy. So they had inflated it so bad, kind of like the Weimar Republic in Germany, where like a wheelbarrow of money barely buys you anything. And money was blowing in the streets down there in Venezuela. That's what they do with these currencies. They just eventually blow away into nothing. Of course, now we're digitally, where we got trillions and trillions of dollars with the US dollar, and yet it still has purchasing power because, it's the petrodollar.
Yeah, it happened with the digital currency. It was a stable coin called UST. It was called US Terra, and it was a really great stable coin that all of a sudden was inflated. All of a sudden went from 70, 30, 20. Now you can't buy a piece of candy with it. If it's anything.
Fiat currencies, in the history of fiat currencies and anything that's created that isn't real money, they all go to zero. So
where can people find more information about this, Michael, or more information about you?
Well, for me, I'm still recovering, and I'm going to start putting my stuff out there again. I mean, I've kind of been in the dark. Right now, I'm pretty much going through you, if you want to know the truth. I'm just starting to get a web page and on Twitter. I'm really looking forward to working on Twitch, which, used to be, that was the first thing I saw on the BSV network, which was, you could social
Twitch.
Twitch, right? But I
Yeah,
don't know what
Twitch,
happened to him.
the social media.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to him, and I know that Daniel Krawitz has been a little frustrated too. He put a tweet out on it not too long ago, like what's
I
going on?
used it yesterday, so maybe it's
Is it
up and
working?
down. Mm,
Okay.
yeah, I was using it yesterday, so I'm not sure what's going on, but
Well, we
I
can talk.
posted
We can talk
something.
about that more
Yeah,
offline.
yeah, I was posting on it yesterday, so it's maybe it's up and down. I'm not sure.
But
So
I'm going to be. I'm going to be now that I'm recovered and I'm 98%. I said this, of course, because of the brain injury I had. I said within a couple months I was 98%, and I think I was like 18%. And so that was part of the injury. When you have a frontal lobe injury, you don't really know how bad you are.
wow. Well, hey, Michael, it's been great, having you on today, and I hope that we can do this conversation again real soon. So,
I would like that, Gavin. Thank you for reaching out to me.
yeah, you're welcome. I'll see you at the top.